In this joint ISPI and BCODN session, we're looking at strategic innovation, whether to think inside the box or outside the box, which goes on the basic premise that our thinking brain is working well. And that might be not a safe assumption all the time. So how can we make your brain stronger? Well, in this session called I'm Trying to Think and Nothing Happens, my name's Adrienne White, and we're going to look at different ways that you can strengthen your brain. Well, it'll be a bit different than if you were in the session itself, but basically we're looking at two key things. The first one is thinking in a way that doesn't harm your brain. And the other is looking at ways to expand your potential for innovation. Now, before we can talk about these two things, I've got to introduce a region of the brain called the frontal lobe, the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex. It has a lot of different names because it's part of a very large region of your brain. So the prefrontal cortex, there are a few things that you should know about it before I go into the material. First of all, it's the newest part of your brain. It takes the highest number of resources, and this is where your thinking, your planning, your strategic innovation comes from. So it's a very important part of the brain. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. First, I have a riddle for you, okay? Our society practically demands it. Our automakers encourage it. Our driving laws frown upon it. Our computers enable it. And our clients or bosses generally require it. What is it? Well, it's multitasking. And I have been a card-carrying member, if there was such a thing, of, the International Multitasking Association. Again, if there was one, because I've always seen it as something that was frankly uniquely feminine, but something that I could do that a lot of people couldn't do. And I was multitasking all the time. Now, let's explain multitasking. Some people say there's no such thing. There is, actually, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. The part of the brain that we're talking about, as I mentioned, is the prefrontal cortex behind your forehead. And guess what? It can only do one thing at a time. Period. One thing. So, you can't multitask with the thinking, analyzing, creative part of your brain. The best you can do is switch very quickly between topics or between tasks. The downside to that is it is exhausting for your already resource-heavy neocortex. Okay? So, if you're doing that a great deal and you're not giving yourself specific brain breaks during the day, you could be harming your brain. And I don't think that's something that anyone wants. So what can you do about it? Well, first of all, and this isn't necessarily an easy thing. It's simple, but it's not easy. And that is practice focusing on one thing at a time. So for example, if you're working on your computer, turn your email off or don't look at it for 40 minutes. Could you do it? Not only is it a very good time management tool, but it also prevents those distractions that can go on and take attention off what you're doing, even if you don't flip over to your email. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do, particularly if you use your brain a lot and you've got a lot of strategic thinking and planning and analyzing going on in your day, to give yourself 60-second brain breaks. So for just a minute or a minute and a half, practice presence. Practice mindfulness. Think about nothing or only what's going on right now. So you would think about, for example, the chair that's supporting you, exactly how it feels underneath your body. So that's one tool. You can get books, literally, that tell you how to do mindfulness and be present. But there's a quick tip for you anyway. The second topic today is your brain's capacity for innovation. Usually if I say to some people, what kind of improvement to your brain would you like to make? Well, what do you think they say? If you guessed memory, you would be right. The majority of people, not just the ones I ask, but in research, the majority of people, if they could fix anything about their brain or change anything about their brain, it would be their memory. Well, here's what's interesting. Memory doesn't actually correlate to innovation and creativity. And so the good news is we have great devices that you can use to supplement your memory, and we already know that there are a lot of exercises that you can do that help. But where do you get the edge cognitively? I'll tell you. There are 3 areas that really are focused on strategic planning, and they are strategic attention, so that's being able to focus on one thing, despite what noise you may hear in your head or in the room. Also, integrated reasoning. And finally, mental flexibility or innovation. And if you're able to practice these 3 things on a regular basis, you're really going to give your brain the edge to age with wisdom and grace and a lot of brain power. So let's look at those 3 things, those 3 functions individually for just a moment, and I'm going to ask you some questions. So for strategic attention, how often do you hold off for an hour while on your computer, hold off from checking your email messages? Here's another question for you. How many people do you interact with in any given day where you are completely present, thinking and doing nothing else but listening to them in that moment? Those are 2 things that are important for strategic attention. So, what about integrated reasoning? Well, how often do you absorb new content and then quickly synthesize that meaning to a number of different scenarios or different aspects of life? That's a great thing to do. And how often or how well do you shift between the tactical and the strategic? Go from the detail to the big picture. Those are also really good ways to exercise that part of your cognition. Finally, that innovation, the mental flexibility. How often do you engage in novel thinking? Well, some people might say, what is that? So, how talented are you at generating multiple innovative solutions and looking at different sides of the situation? And that includes really appreciating other points of view. It's not easy for every brain. So how often do you try something new? That's another part of really building in that flexibility into your brain. And finally, if somebody disagrees with you, how well could you start to argue their point of view? These are all more advanced cognitive functions that will really give you the brain edge if you take the time to practice. Now, there are a lot of different things you can do. I'm going to leave it to you to look those up, but now you know what they're called. So those areas of the brain will really help you gain a competitive edge cognitively. And let's face it, for most of us in our work, that's the part of our brain we need the most, not our memory. So what can you do, by the way, to build your memory, but also every function of your brain? Well, a big part of it is exercise. And even 15 minutes a day will do it. I call it the 15-minute pill. It takes a little long, but it's something that you need to do every day for your brain health. There are a lot of other reasons to exercise, but if you can manage 15 minutes a day, your brain will thank you because it generates more neural stem cells. Yes, you can grow your brain. So that's a good and beautiful thing. Of course, what you eat is important, rest is important, and play is important. And I'm going to give you 2 quick things before we round out and finish this session to tell you how you can play while building these 3 cognitive areas. So when you watch a movie, when it's finished, ask yourself what the key themes were, and then try and apply them to a different area in your life. If you were to create a headline about this session and the other sessions that you've seen, What would it read? So generating these things really force you to look at the big thing, to draw conclusions, to synthesize, and that will really strengthen those areas of your brain. So there is the quickest brain update ever. I hope you learned something new and enjoy all of the sessions in this joint Cracker Barrel.